You're listening to The Fix with Ryan Rothstein, live from the Prop Swap studios of AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio. Prop swap that ticket and cash in while the odds have improved. Once again, here's Ryan.
All right, welcome back live in the Prop Swap studios to The Fix. I'm your host, Ryan Rothstein, and kicking myself here because I just wasted a couple minutes just blabbering about who knows what in that second segment, and it cut out some time with my favorite part of the night, your football fix with NFL Eagles insider John McMullen, host of Extending the Play every Saturday morning right here on AM 1490 from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. JF McMullen on Twitter, and all of his written work at phillyvoice.com and Sports Illustrated at si.com. Well, John, it seems like all of the tools are back in the toolbox here, right? Who's not on the field? Seems like we have everyone healthy. Is that accurate?
Yeah, everybody who was eligible to practice, with the exception of Fletcher Cox, and he got a day off, a maintenance day, so no concern there. Not everybody a full participant, but everybody, again, Marcus Epps, for instance, is on the COVID list, but everybody who was eligible was at least limited in practice. So you think about all the names, and you know, the biggest names, it starts with Miles Sanders and Lane Johnson and Isaac Seumalo. Those guys are all practicing. And in Isaac's case, which is interesting because he just came off, obviously, hasn't come off injured reserve yet, but the Eagles started the 21-day practice window on him on Monday, and he was a full go. So that's a pretty good indication he's going to be ready to play Sunday against the New York Giants. So that offensive line is going to start looking a little sturdier pretty quickly.
All right, what's the number one thing on the list of adjustments or improvements coming off the bye? The team's rested. They seem to be the healthiest they've been all season long. So, John McMullen, what are you really looking to see that we haven't really seen throughout the year so far in these games?
Well, there's a lot of things offensively. I think people have focused on that, and I think that has kind of really given the defense kind of a pass. So you need help on both sides of the ball. You need improvements. But I think number one, first and foremost, is ball security. That nothing gets you beaten quicker in the NFL than turning the football over. And we know the Eagles have been one of the worst teams in football when it comes to turnover ratio. And it starts with the quarterback, and it starts with Carson Wentz. And now you have this whole Brett Favre kerfuffle bringing up Nick Foles, which I think should never be talked about again in this city, but here we are. That part of it doesn't make any sense, but the part that does make some sense is the quarterback needs to stop turning the football over. And you can make a lot of excuses for lack of efficiency, and some of them are really good explanations, starting with the offensive line, starting with some of the issues Miles Sanders has had injury-wise. He's missed 3 games. And then we've talked a lot about the receivers and especially the young receivers not running routes in the best way possible. All of those are legitimate explanations for why the offense has struggled at times. But at the end of the day, that doesn't mean you have to turn it over. So, 3 and out and punting the football, especially with the year Cam Johnson is having, is not the worst thing in the world. And it's a heck of a lot better than turning over to the other side. So I think if the Eagles can just start playing clean football, and that's not even necessarily winning the turnover battle, but staying even each and every week, going to have a much better opportunity to win some of these games, even against the better teams on their schedule.
No, absolutely, and I want to get into some of those offensive struggles and the turnovers in a second, and it's nothing new, like you said, but let's talk about the defense, who maybe have been able to slide under this public radar a little bit. What is your assessment from the defense overall? Big names that stick out, Fletcher Cox. What are your thoughts on him moving forward? And the linebacker position, of course, is always a hot topic.
Yeah, it is. And I think you're going to see a bigger test coming up for the linebackers. Remember, Nate Gary is out on injured reserve, and I think people are happy about that. And if you rewind back to the Dallas game and how well T.J. Edwards played coming off IR, that was his first game back from his hamstring injury. I think people got excited about that. But, the main issue with T.J. Edwards and the reason why he was essentially a two-down player, not a three-down linebacker, is because he's got some coverage issues. He's not the fastest guy in the world. He ran a 4.8 40 coming out of college. That's why he wasn't drafted. He's a very, very productive player at Wisconsin. But when you can't run in this league, especially in the modern NFL at the linebacker position, you're going to have some issues. And if you see the games coming up, not necessarily the Giants, although everybody is going to be more dangerous than the Cowboys were with Ben DiNucci. So even Daniel Jones can hurt you throwing the football. But then after that, you start getting into the Baker Mayfields of the world, and then after that, it's really amped up to the Russell Wilsons and Aaron Rodgers and Drew Breeses of the world. And believe me, if you have linebackers that can't cover, those quarterbacks are going to find them. So we're going to learn a lot about T.J. Edwards in the second half of the season and whether he's got a legitimate opportunity to be a player in this league. And then the back seven as a whole. You mentioned Fletcher Cox. I know, it's the sack thing. I mean, he's playing at a really high level, and this defensive line, and Brandon Graham's in that category as well, it's clearly the strength of this team. It's deep. It's good, and that's the strength. But they haven't been as good on third downs and red zone defense. And I think that is directly related to trying to replace Malcolm Jenkins, because that's where he really showed up. Not only from a physical standpoint, but just from a mental standpoint, understanding the defense, getting everybody lined up on the back seven correctly. So I think they're still working through that.
What has the addition of Darius Slay afforded Jim Schwartz the opportunity to do differently? More man coverage, more press coverage? I haven't really asked you about this. It's probably a question that I should have brought up last week during the bye, but give me your assessment of Slay through 8 weeks and moving forward.
Yeah, he's been, as advertised, clearly the best corner in this Doug Peterson, Jim Schwartz era the Eagles have had, and I mean by a wide margin. And he's enabled them to travel with opposing receivers if they want. And, yeah, they play a lot more man coverage than they had in the past because they have a guy who can do it. But there are some issues with that still because, remember, and especially when you travel, well, if you travel a great corner like Darius Slay, there's unintended consequences in what they are. The other guys have to travel. I mean, Devontae Maddox is on the move when he's healthy. He missed a little bit of time. But the other corners, by and large, have not played well, and I think have been kind of disappointing, to be honest. And it starts with Devontae and even more so Nickel Roby-Coleman. I had high hopes for him. He had a great training camp. The Eagles flat out said they thought he was a top 5 slot corner in this league. Hasn't played like that and really has lost some of his playing time to Cravon LeBlanc. And Cravon was injured in the Dallas game. He had a quad injury. He was back at practice. He was another guy. So they've had to mix and match because they've had a lot of injuries opposite Darius Slay. But Darius has been he's been great, man. He's been everything they said he was, everything we thought he was. He's a 3-time Pro Bowl cornerback in Detroit, and he's still a top 10 corner in this league.
Talking with John McMullen, just like we do every single night for your football fix on the Fix. JF McMullen on Twitter, extending the play every Saturday morning from 10 to 11. John, the Eagles, 3-point favorites on the road against the Giants. Assess how the Giants have been playing as of late. They're coming off a win, but it's against one of those NFC least opponents. What type of issues do the Giants potentially present matchup-wise?
Yeah, they're getting better. I mean, you only have to go back a couple weeks and to that first Eagles game at Lincoln Financial Field, and they outplayed the Eagles for the vast majority of that game. They were up 21-10 late before the wheels came off, and I think you see that with a lot of young teams. Don't know how to finish games, so to speak. Don't know how to get over the hump, and that's a learning progress. And I think they're going through that, and they are getting a little bit better. Obviously, a rookie head coach, second-year quarterback, it starts with that. And their defense is much improved. And I would say, Jason Kelsey talked to us today and mentioned how talented their front is and their defensive line. I think everyone looks at Washington, and rightfully so, and says, boy, they might be a bad team, but they got a great defensive line. Well, you can almost put the Giants in that category as well. They might be a bad team, but they got a great defensive line. So you got to deal with those guys up front first and foremost, and I think the Eagles kind of understand that.
John, I'm bouncing around a little bit tonight. There's a lot to get to. And you mentioned, the Nick Foles dynamic, and that should be never discussed, never brought up again. But our good friend, you can blame him, Eitan Shander. I just saw him tweet out the audio of Carson Wentz answering this. So do you mind if I play this? It's like 15 seconds, and then we'll get a reaction from you.
No. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, here we go.
Hey, we'll end it here with EJ.
Hey, Carson, I'm wondering if you saw what Brett Favre said on ESPN about if the Eagles should have stuck with Nick Foles instead of going forward with you, and if so, what your thoughts were.
I did not. So maybe you can enlighten me, or at the end of the day, it's really whatever. I mean, everyone has their opinion, so I don't know.
And just real quick, John, the awkwardness that is seeping through my computer screen and Carson's look on his face. But go ahead, you take the wheel.
Yeah, I didn't hear it. I assume it was EJ's question about Brett Favre. So I was in the press conference, obviously. But, yeah, I mean, he claimed he didn't hear it, didn't know what Brett said. Look, I when players say things like that, I tend not to believe that.
Yeah.
And I didn't necessarily believe Carson in that moment, but it's from his perspective. It's like the question's got to be asked, but from his perspective, I also understand. What is he supposed to say? So
yeah.
I think it's probably. And I think I mentioned yesterday on the show, through this bye week, or it might have been Monday, you've had everybody chiming in on Carson Wentz, from Brett Favre probably being the most high profile. But even locally, your Ron Jaworskis and people like that, everybody is trying to add their 2 cents into what the heck is wrong with Carson Wentz. So I'm sure it's permeated through at some point to him. He knows this is a narrative. He knows this is a conversation. But, I think the Brett Favre thing hurts a little bit more, and I've seen a bunch of people. And I'm going to push back, and I'll push back on Aton's show and some other people. Kevin Kincaid from Crossing Broad, my buddy there, has said, this is not a story. It is a story. This is a Hall of Fame quarterback who's good friends with the head coach. And not only that, by the way, Carson Wentz grew up kind of emulating Brett Favre. So it's probably pretty hurtful, and people have compared his playing style to Brett Favre, who's, probably the ultimate gunslinger, so to speak, in NFL history, and a guy who would take chances and fit footballs in tight windows and try to extend plays and keep things going. And, he's out there saying Nick Foles is better than Carson Wentz. Now, hey, I'll be the first to tell Brett he's wrong.
Yeah.
He's completely wrong. I mean, Nick Foles, and here I am talking about it again.
I
Nick
know,
Foles
here we
lost
are.
the job to Gardner Minshew.
Yeah. No, and
he
no, I'm sorry. I just want to add to it, John. And here we are talking about it. I'm just mad at myself. But and we've talked about this a million times, you and I, John, over the years. A million. But it's not Nick Foles is better, right? Like, I would assume anyone that has half a brain, a football brain, knows Carson Wentz is more talented. But there is the dynamic of, for whatever reason, the game plan and just the fluidity of the offense when Nick Foles was in was different with Carson Wentz. And I know your answer. You've given it to me a million times, but it just seems like ever since that injury, they can't get that same cohesiveness with Carson. And I don't know if it's a Carson and Doug thing more than anything else.
Well, I mean, Doug has said and has admitted at times that maybe it's a little bit easier from his perspective because, Nick just did what he was told, and Carson's more of a type A personality, however you want to describe it. He's going to push to get certain things in the game plan. He's going to push to do certain things. But ultimately, I think the latter is better than the former. I mean, Doug has also admitted, people forget when Carson got hurt in 2017, those first couple games at the end of the regular season were just awful with Nick Foles in the regular season. And basically, Doug told John DeFilippo and Frank Reich to go back and talk to Nick and look at the film and try to see what he did well. And they basically redid the entire offense, and they scaled it back dramatically. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't like it was easier at the beginning. They kind of figured it out. And the figuring it out part was, we got to simplify this thing down. We got to run a bunch of RPOs. We got to just have one read type offenses and very, very simple concepts, which I think is interesting because everybody complains when the Eagles are too simple now, and they loved it when it worked. So, it's all about success. I talk about that all the time. You're not judging play calls. You're not judging offenses. You're judging success or failure.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of talk about Doug and Carson and everyone saying, that's how Carson Wentz is. He's aggressive. We're not going to try and change him. And we're going to basically, I'm paraphrasing, continue to allow him to be himself and do what he does. Moving forward here now, John, how can Doug and the coaching staff reel him in a little bit without making it obvious that they're reeling him in, like just to help him limit the turnovers, I guess?
Yeah, I think I mentioned before, I think it's got more to do with the supporting cast. Like, I think at this point Carson is Carson, and he's just going to do what he's going to do. And, you're going to accept the good with that, and you're probably not going to accept the bad with it. It's evidence of what we've seen. You know, if you think about not the Giants game, but if you remember, I think it was the Giants game in Week 17 last year. He had that throw across his body into the middle of the field, and it ended up as a touchdown. I mean, it was just one of those throws that if you're a coach, you just scream, no, 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 and then at the very end, yes, when it turns into a touchdown. It was a terrible decision by a quarterback. It was a terrible play, but he fit the football in there, and what did everybody say? What a great play.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's what you're gonna get with Carson Wentz. He's going to make plays that he's not supposed to make, and he's also going to turn the football over because he's trying to make those plays. And I think the better protection you have up front, I've talked about the route running a lot, the young receivers, also Miles Sanders. I think out of the backfield, I think if they start being in the right positions, I think more positive things will happen. But Carson's going to be Carson, and Carson's going to try to emulate Brett Favre, and he's going to try to make plays.
I have about 4 minutes left with Eagles insider John McMullen. John, real quick, just a quick COVID-19 update and anything new here within the NFL.
Just that the Eagles were in the intensive protocol, so it's an interesting situation. So basically they have virtual meetings, then they go practice together, and then they got to go home and get back into virtual meetings. So I think it's silly. I think, I don't think there's much common sense in all this, but I talked about that. They do have to be a little bit more socially distanced on the practice field. They have to wear masks on the practice field. Everybody's got to wear those Oakley face shields on the practice field in these intensive protocols. And then when they get to the game, they don't have to wear them. So, again, I don't understand these things. Jalen Mills mentioned today it's not the easiest thing to breathe in. So that's why none of the players have kind of embraced those things. But, I mean, that's where we are with this thing. And it's not just the Eagles. Probably half the league is in this so-called intensive protocols as these cases spike across the country. And it's only getting worse as we get into flu season, so to speak. And I think it's only going to continue to get worse. And you see all the scale backs. We joked about it with COVID having a 10 o'clock bedtime now in New Jersey. We're back to this. We're back to this again. And it's going to be interesting to see if the NFL can power through this. It really is.
All right, last one for you here. Not football related. John, the Masters starts tomorrow. How big of a golf fan are you, for the listeners out there? And most sports fans at least follow the Masters. Are you one of those people? And if you want to throw even a prediction out there, or who are you looking forward to watching, if at all?
Well, I'm not. I love to play golf, and I only play it a couple times a year. But I love the game. But I'm like a lot of fugazi golf people. I mean, I get interested if Tiger is involved and Tiger is doing well. And if he's not, and obviously he's had a lot of issues over the past few years, I tend to lose interest. So, but I think that's been golf as a whole. I think they lost so many casual fans, and that's where I would be. So I'm not your guy for a golf prediction.
That's okay.
I know the big hitter. Everybody's in the big hitters. He juicing or not?
He's juicing. DeChambeau is absolutely juicing.
Yeah, probably. If you can hit the ball that far, but
even just the before and after photos, he's massive.
And by the way, he probably, there was that speculation about Tiger in his prime.
That's right.
As well. But I mean, he was obviously one of the most dominant athletes of his generation, his time.
Yep.
And he was also one of those guys like Jordan, Muhammad Ali, and LeBron James who transcend his sport.
He did.
They just don't have that now.
Nope. We're running out of time, John. But the Tiger effect is very real. There he is, John McMullen. We have to take a break. We'll be right back.
You're hearing AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio. Listen online at 1490sportsbettingradio.com.